Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for one of the most disturbing and bizarre cases in the history of true crime. Strange and brutal beyond belief. It is the story of the shoemaker, Joseph Kallinger. His terrifying delusions, horrifying sexual perversions, and desire to kill every human on earth to please God. And today's episode is a request from good friend of the show, Rob Tannehill, author of Prince Junkie. Thanks so much for listening, Rob. We hope you enjoy the show.
Yes, thank you, Rob. And now, let's begin. Prologue. Geraldo Rivera and the Serial Killers. In 1988, talk show host Geraldo Rivera was at the top of his game and on a roll, nailing one cultural hot topic after another. First, there was devil worship, exposing Satan's underground, a massive hit, exploiting the raging satanic panic fever dream sweeping the country. A program we briefly explored on episode 105.
Then came his Young Hate Mongers show, where he brought on stage black civil rights activist Roy Innis, as well as white supremacist John Metzger. Words were exchanged between the two, which resulted in Roy Innis attempting to strangle John Metzger. Chaos erupting as both sides flooded the stage, at which point a skinhead threw a chair into the melee, hitting Geraldo right in the face and breaking his nose.
But that wasn't going to stop him. After devil worshippers and Nazi skinheads, or boneheads, Geraldo needed something else shocking and lurid to titillate his daytime audience with, and came upon serial killers, doing a 2-hour expose on killers on death row, bringing back his old pal Charlie Manson for yet another interview.
And Geraldo had a new killer as well, Joseph Kallinger, a Philadelphia shoemaker who'd gone on a psychotic rampage of sexual mutilation and torture, aided by his 12-year-old son. The case was gruesome and bizarre beyond belief, and the interview was chilling to the core. The program was called Murder Live from Death Row and went like this.
There are killers on the loose, traveling from town to town, state to state, stalking their victims, kidnapping, raping, then murdering them. They roam the highways and shopping centers of America, crazed with sadistic lust. Police insist that to avoid becoming one of their victims, the public must first understand the perverse kind of twisted minds that they are up against. So meet Joe Kallinger, currently serving a life sentence for sex-related murder here at the State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, just outside Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Oh, hi. I'm a patient person, got a good listening ear, and try to help people.
You're patient with a good ear and you try to help people?
Yes.
When you're not trying to murder them?
Yes.
You murdered your own son?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
He was a sacrifice. I was to murder 3 billion people on the planet Earth, and he was a sacrifice to see if I could murder one of my own. At the end of murdering all the people on Earth, I was going to murder my own family and then take my own life and become God.
What do you think of the death penalty?
I'm opposed to it.
The state has no right to take your life, but you can murder other people?
I don't think anyone has the right to take a life.
Except you.
When I'm under hallucination, I do. These voices come from God.
These hallucinations, do you still experience them?
Yes, I do. Often.
Do you ever feel violent?
Yes, I do.
What do you feel like doing?
Killing people.
You still feel like killing people?
Yes.
Describe the feeling that you get when you feel like killing.
Well, last March 11th, I was hallucinating, and I took a razor blade and I cut a man's throat here in the hospital.
What would you do if you got out of here?
I would probably do the same thing over again.
What?
Try to murder everyone on the planet Earth.
Do you think you'd murder me, Joe?
Yes.
That's gruesome, Joe. That's horrible.
Yes, it is.
And you don't blame me if I say, I hope that you never get out of this place?
I hope I never do either.
The live feed of this interview beamed out across the planet, and the world was horrified and wondered just who this shoemaker killer Joseph Kallinger was.
Chapter 1. Little Joey.
Joseph Lee Brenner III was born December 11, 1935, at the Northern Liberties Hospital in Philadelphia. A scandalous birth that would mark a deeply troubled life, and see his name soon changed.
While the birth certificate said his parents were Joseph Lee Brenner Jr. and his 20-year-old wife, Judith Brenner, the truth is, Judith and Joseph had been separated when she got pregnant, and Joseph Brenner was not his father. Little Joey was illegitimate.
The marriage was troubled from the beginning, as Judith was Jewish and Joseph Roman Catholic, and Judith was in the process of getting a divorce when little Joey was born.
Judith planned on giving him up for adoption immediately, and a Catholic agency even came to take the baby. But once she laid eyes on her baby son, she just couldn't give him up.
For 3 weeks after the birth, she recovered at a friend's house, breastfeeding little Joey, cooing and whispering to him, caressing and loving him. But then she had to go back to work, so she placed him in a private boarding school and visited him once a week.
And studies show that when a baby is suddenly separated from the mother like this, it can cause lifelong issues of abandonment and trauma. In an article entitled Psychobiological Roots of Early Attachment by Myron Hoffer, it says that early maternal separation can result in a series of traumatic emotional reactions, during which the child engages in an anxious period, followed by a period of declining behavioral responsiveness.
Then, when Judith could no longer pay the boarding school, little Joey was moved again and placed in St. Vincent's orphanage. But Judith refused to put him on the adoption list. She was now divorcing her husband and hoped to marry Joey's father and raise him. But the truth was, Joey's father was already married with a family, news that devastated her.
So Joey was then put on the adoption list.
On October 15th, 1939, when Joey was 22 months and 14 days old, he was adopted by Stephen and Anna Kallinger, who changed his name to Joseph Kallinger.
The Kallingers met in Philadelphia, but they were both Austrian immigrants with heavy German accents who'd come to the United States in the 1920s, married, and realized they were unable to have children and decided to adopt.
Anna had wanted a girl, but when Stephen saw Joey's lush black hair so much like his own, he insisted they adopt him. saying a boy would be best to take up work at Stephen's shoe repair shop, not to mention he was already toilet trained and could walk and talk.
Anna would often tell Joseph she wanted a girl and that he'd been a disappointment to her from the moment she brought him into her house.
Ah, that's so sad. The Kallingers lived in a 2-story brick row house in the Kensington section of Philadelphia, with their shoe shop, Kallinger Rapid Shoe Repair, attached.
They were tough, hardworking people, immigrants, with little time for affection and kindness, and insisted that the toddler be referred to as Joseph, not Joe nor Joey.
Anna, whose father died when she was 12, causing her to be forced to work in a factory, could hardly read or write.
At one point, Joseph's birth mother, Judith, showed up, unannounced, at the Kallinger home, saying she wanted to see where her son was being raised. But this infuriated the Kallingers, who wanted to know how she'd even gotten their name and address, as it was supposed to be sealed by the adoption court.
Judith then coyly asked them for $500, and they angrily threatened to return little Joseph to the orphanage, saying they didn't want him anymore, accusing Judith of extortion.
Judith eventually left without getting any money, and the Kallingers did keep Joseph, but they'd often threatened to send him back to the orphanage growing up and tell him that his horrible mother had attempted to sell him to them. Being sent back to the orphanage would be a constant threat made at any sign of disobedience.
Chapter 2. Growing Up a Kallinger.
The Kallingers refused to celebrate Joseph's birthday or give him any presents, saying that the food he ate, the clothes on his back, and his room were presents enough. He wasn't allowed to go out with the other kids, wasn't allowed to trick or treat or play with any children.
Stephen told the neighbors about his adopted son.
We will be strict with him, like the old country. He will be a good boy. He will respect my clean house. No fooling around. No playing with other kids. I am going to make him an expert shoemaker.
Yikes, they were extremely cold, and Joseph says he never felt close to them at all, never felt loved or accepted. They treated him like both a burden and a servant.
Joseph tried to be kind. One Mother's Day, Joseph managed to save enough pennies to buy a potted plant for Anna. But when she saw it, she simply said, "Why would you spend your money on that? It's just going to die anyway. Dummkopf."
They called him Dummkopf so often it became like a pet name.
Anna would beat him with a wooden spoon at any infraction, and Stephen would scream that he was sending him back to the orphanage and threaten him with a distinctive green knife that he used in his shoemaking, Joseph becoming obsessed with the knife.
Joseph had a bit of a club foot, a condition he may have inherited from his birth mother. So Stephen, who was an award-winning shoemaker, said to be one of the best in Philadelphia, made him a pair of orthopedic shoes.
Orthopedic shoes would come to consume Joseph's brain and be an endless source of delusion.
Such a strange thing. I'm intrigued. From a very early age, Joseph was delusional, believing worms were the spirits of dead people, and he was afraid to put one on a fishing hook as it could cause a corpse to rise from the grave seeking vengeance.
It's a wild one, isn't it? Putting
That is wild.
a worm on a hook will make a zombie. He also believed he was watched over by a naked female angel with wings and very small breasts. He was terrified of large breasts. He also believed his soul had once been inside of a butterfly.
And Joseph had an imaginary friend named Tommy who lived in his stomach and talked through his index finger. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it should. It's exactly like The Shining.
Joseph isn't here, Mrs. Kallinger. Stephen and Anna were extremely old-fashioned, and they forbade any mention of sex whatsoever. It was a taboo subject that was verboten and never to be brought up. Joseph didn't even know what sex was at all.
When Joseph was 5, he was walking home from kindergarten when he heard some older boys using a word he wasn't familiar with. So when he got home, he asked his parents, "What does fuck mean?"
Stephen and Anna flew into an utter rage at the mention of the word fuck. They grabbed him and beat him with a wooden spoon and locked him in his room for a week, saying he was a bad, bad boy. He was deeply traumatized and had no idea what he'd done wrong or even what the mysterious word meant.
But Joseph was a curious kid and wondered about the opposite sex. He met a friendly girl in an alley and asked her to lift her skirt and pull down her panties so he could see how she was different. Very innocent, he was only 5, but a neighbor heard them and reported the incident to Anna, who beat Joseph and locked him in his room, and afterwards his parents came to believe that he was some kind of sexual delinquent.
At some point, Joseph suffered a hernia. I've seen it said that this was caused by a severe beating from Stephen, but I've also seen it said that it happened while he was climbing a fence and a girl kicked him. But, it also could have been simply having a weak abdominal wall.
So Joey underwent an operation for the hernia, a painful and grueling procedure that left him hospitalized for 16 days. When he returned home, things were very strange. His parents, believing he was becoming a sexual deviant because he'd asked what fuck meant and was curious about the difference between boys and girls, decided to tell him that while being operated on, the doctor had removed his desire for sex by doing something to his penis, which they called his bird.
My parents called penises a bird too. I wonder if it's a German thing. Because my dad was like German heritage and all in the weird German stuff. I don't know.
Wild.
And they called a vagina, they called it a rosebud. It's like your bird
strange.
and your rosebud.
Okay. Kind of a weird twist on the birds and the bees.
Maybe. I didn't think about it that way. Wow. Maybe, I don't know. I think it's just being very innocent, you know what I mean? Very...
Yeah, like giving it very innocuous terminology. Yeah. Regardless, this whole thing with Joey is all very strange. And according to the book The Shoemaker, An Anatomy of a Psychotic by Flora Schreiber, the exchange went like this. Stephen and Anna telling their adoptive son,
"Yeah, Dr. Daly did something to you in the hospital. He fixed your hernia, but he also fixed your little bird."
"What's wrong with my little bird?"
"A demon lives inside it."
"Well, what's a demon?"
"An evil spirit. It works for the devil, not for Jesus."
"It was in my little bird? What was it doing there?"
"The demon makes your bird get hard. It makes it get hard and stick out, so you got to do bad things with it. Then your soul goes to the devil when you die. Dr. Daly drove out the demon, Joseph. He fixed your bird so it will never grow big. Demons can't live in birds that don't grow big. So your bird ain't going to get hard. Understand?"
"But what did Dr. Daly do to my little bird?"
"That's a secret. Yeah, a secret. But you won't have no demon in your bird because your bird will always be small, small, small."
"Didn't your bird grow?"
"Questions! Always will see questions. Now listen. In the old country, the priest freed your mother and me from the demon. But in this country, we had to get Dr. Daly to do it. Dr. Daly delivered you from evil."
"Mom, does your bird look like Dad's?"
"Girls' birds are different than boys' birds. Pay attention. Your bird won't get hard because the demon is gone. Always you will be soft there. So you're gonna be a good boy, a good man. Never get in no trouble. Never get a girl in no trouble. Not now. Not when you're a man. We won't have no trouble now. Not like other people have with their kids. Now go to your room. You're sick and you must rest."
As Joseph left for his room, he gazed into a mirror in the hall. Joseph had long been obsessed with the mirror, pretending that the image of himself in it was another little boy who'd come to play with him.
Ah, that's so sad. He was so lonely. He was playing with his own image in the mirror. But at that moment, Joseph had his first full-on hallucination. There in the mirror, he saw a flying penis. A penis riding the green knife his father used during shoe repair.
Joseph knew that the doctor had used a knife to cut him open, but his parents told him the doctor had also somehow used the knife on his penis to remove a demon. And now his penis would never grow. He was filled with castration anxiety and would forevermore see other men as a threat because of what he perceived as their large penises, and his anxiety over large breasts would bubble up into full-on fear and terror.
Poor mixed up kid, man. It's funny in some ways, but it's so horrible. This whole story is it's something, man. Joseph would later say that what his parents told him after his hernia surgery forever changed him, and that he saw his life divided by that moment into a before the hernia and an after the hernia.
Chapter 3, Post-Hernia.
From the time he was 7 years old, Joseph worked in his father's shop. Every evening when he got home from school, he repaired shoes, and on Saturday as well, pulling heels off, filling bushel baskets with heel pads, running errands. He wasn't allowed to go out, wasn't allowed to go to birthday parties or snowball fights, or ride a bike or trick or treat.
When the school took a field trip to the zoo and Joe asked to go, his mother hit him in the head with a hammer right in front of a customer who'd remember the incident for the rest of her life.
At his school, there was this little prayer book, a missal, and Joe became obsessed with it, believing if he read from the book with gilded edges, it would magically make him incredibly smart.
Eventually, he stole the prayer missal and hid it in his bedroom at home. The teachers all knew it was him who'd stolen it, as he'd been utterly obsessed with it, and they told Stephen and Anna, who were furious.
"A thief! A thief!" they exclaimed. "There is a thief in our house!" They made him kneel on sandpaper and pray for hours every night, saying that they were going to send him back to the orphanage, that he was no good, a disgrace to their home.
For a long while, Joseph kept the little book, personifying it, seeing it as a friend, his only friend. But eventually, he became so frightened he'd be caught with it that he threw it down the sewer.
And life just kept getting harder and weirder for Joseph.
Joseph felt a bond with discarded things, abandoned things, and began collecting what he called treasures, broken motors and old junk, feeling a bond with the stuff, as he too had been abandoned and was seen as no good.
Wandering the neighborhood in search of abandoned treasures, he came across a vacant lot with these old oil tanks. They were huge, 20 feet tall, and Joseph would climb up and down into the tank, hiding in the darkness there, feeling safe, letting his imagination run wild, pretending there were all these friends there with him.
But one day when he climbed into one of the large tanks, he was surprised to find that there were 3 boys inside, 2 engaged in oral sex, the other watching them and masturbating.
When the boys saw Joseph there in the dark tank, they pulled knives on him, took him, and as one boy molested him, the others watched masturbating.
It was an extremely traumatic event. He was too terrified to tell his parents, And again, knives and violence were mixed up with sex in his mind, and he was deeply confused over how he'd gotten an erection when he was molested, as he believed the doctor had removed the demon that caused that to happen with his little bird.
Even further troubled now, he became extremely resentful, seeing other children receiving birthday and Christmas presents, and he began acting out in rage, sneaking into a closet at school and slashing at all the coats with a knife.
He'd steal spare change from his parents and take kids to the movies with him, bribing them to go so he wouldn't be so lonely, but was eventually caught.
Again, his parents erupted in rage over his thievery, this time saying it was a demon in his fingers that was causing him to steal. So, while his mother held him down, his father took his hand and burned his fingertips on the stove, afterwards refusing to let him run them under cold water or put lotion on the blisters, telling him that the pain was to be a reminder that he was a horrible little thief.
But Joe continued to steal. He was just so lonely and loved the movies. 6 times he was caught stealing change, and 6 times his fingers were burned.
Now 12 years old and in the throes of puberty, he took his father's knife, the one with the green handle, and carved a hole in his bedroom wall, using it to simultaneously masturbate into and hide his penis inside of.
Knives had become some strange sexual fetish in his mind. The knife the doctor used, the knife the boys used to molest him, his father's green knife. He began to masturbate with the knife lying beside him, stroking it.
One day, going through the trash, looking for treasures, he discovered some pornographic magazines.
The pictures thrilled him to no end, and he'd masturbate to them while taking his father's knife and carving holes in the pictures of the women, and stabbing the images of penises.
Knives and holes became strange magical symbols and metaphors. The hole in the wall, vaginas, hell itself, a great hole in the earth full of tortured sinners, full of demons with knives. Knives and holes and holes and knives.
A knife was symbolically what had taken his manhood during his hernia surgery, and symbolically also what could return it, restore it. Yes, a knife could take his manhood, but it could bring it back as well.
And the voice of a demon in his head urged him to cut somebody, to restore the power the doctor had taken away during surgery.
So Joseph Kallinger became determined to cut someone.
He found a boy walking alone, took him to the river on the pretense of fishing, then pulled a knife on him, demanding the boy drop his pants, intent on stabbing the boy's penis.
But when the whimpering, terrified boy lowered his underwear, Joseph just panicked at the sight of his bird and ran away.
But Joseph was now full-on obsessed, taking the bus out into the suburbs and looking for children to terrorize. One boy he took at knife point, making him lower his pants, and actually put the boy's penis into his mouth, as the boys in the oil drum had done to him, the demon in his head telling him to bite it, which he did, before running off in a panic as the boy cried out in pain.
Chapter 4. Life Goes On.
Joseph was working nearly full-time now at his father's shoe repair shop, so they began to pay him, though they also began charging him rent, $12 a month, and making him buy food. But his father told him that he was such a skilled worker that he would leave the shop to him when he retired. The shop was to be Joseph's inheritance.
Joe was still plagued with a deep-seated fear of large breasts and large-breasted women, and began having terrifying nightmares that he was being smothered by breasts, the nipples razor sharp and cutting into his skin.
Still attracted to women, though, Joe became obsessed with small-breasted women.
At the movies one day, Joe met a small-breasted girl named Hilda Bergman. She was scrawny and dirty and ravenous, and Joe bought her some food, which she thankfully scarfed down, explaining her father had died and her mother was an alcoholic who spent all her time in taverns and bars, and she was basically on her own.
Joe and Hilda began seeing each other, going to the movies. Joe felt protective of her, but his parents hated her and demanded he not see her. Not only was she poor and her mother a known drunk, she was Irish.
Dun, dun, dun. But Joe continued to see her, eventually losing his virginity to her. He was in love and very happy. But the only way he could have sex with her was to imagine a knife cutting skin, slashing, ripping, or a scalpel in an operation. But he had no urge to hurt Hilda, though, far from it. He felt a lot of affection for the skinny Irish girl, but he couldn't achieve an erection without thoughts of knives, blood, and death.
He was just 15 years old.
Joseph developed a strange, uncontrollable twitch, craning his neck and grimacing, sometimes falling into laughing spells. It scared his parents. Instead of taking him to a doctor or therapist, they instead put a padlock on their door and kept a baseball bat for protection.
And then, working on shoes in the workshop one night, the voice of God spoke to him. Joe Kallinger, you are a special person. You must undertake a special mission. Already, through your orthopedic work, you are easing pain in the feet. The feet are also the key to the brain. Your mission is to control the brain through the feet. This is what I, God of the universe, command you to do. You will use this method to help yourself and heal mankind. You must heal and save.
Under the command of the Lord Almighty, Joseph then began his first orthopedic experiment.
He put wedges of rubber into his shoe, which caused his foot to tilt inward, causing a feeling of relaxation through his leg and spine. And he theorized that as the foot changes the position of the body, it causes chemical changes in the brain, which would heal his mental health.
And it appeared to be working. The wedges of rubber made Joe feel more secure. The twitches and strange laughing spells stopped. He became more social, started hanging out at Bishop Menage, where he learned to play pool and poker. He made friends for the first time. His relationship with Hilda became more committed. His whole life was opening up.
And so Joseph moved out, finding an apartment directly between his parents' row home and Hilda's. And at 16 years old, Joseph quit school to work full-time and asked Hilda to marry him.
She accepted.
So, defying his parents, Joe and Hilda took a bus to Elkton, Maryland, and were married by a justice of the peace, and then came back to Philadelphia.
Joe was happy as a lark, planning on having a large and loving family, giving his children all the affection and care he was deprived of.
He dreamed of opening a chain of shoe shops around Philadelphia and New York, buying a big house in the suburbs, getting a Cadillac, and being a kind, patient, and loving father.
Joe then stopped working for his father, finding a better-paying job at Frank Grandy's Shoe Repair on Girard Avenue.
And on August 9th, 1955, Hilda gave birth to a baby girl they named Anna after Joe's mother.
But all was not sunshine and roses. Hilda would drink during the day, refused to do any housework. Joe would work all day and come home to find the place a mess. Dishes piled up, the bed unmade.
The Irish. Just kidding. The Irish are wonderful people. My wife's from an Irish family, in fact.
Same. Hilda refused to nurse baby Anna and wouldn't change her diaper, often just leaving her naked in a playpen covered in urine and feces. They argued about religion when Joe tried to convert her to Roman Catholicism, suggesting they get remarried in a church by a priest. She coldly told him, "Fuck you."
And Joseph's old rage and anger returned.
Then in May 1955, Hilda became pregnant again, but she told him she wanted to have an abortion.
And Joe used the line his parents did when he had been disobedient. "Behave yourself!"
Then Hilda told him his penis was too small, and all the old childhood trauma came back. The fears of castration. The twitches returned, the strange laugh. Hilda told him he was crazy, like something out of a horror movie.
On January 12th, 1956, Hilda gave birth to a son they named Stephen, after Joseph's father.
Hilda fed the children only peanuts and soda pop to the point they became sick and had abdominal pain, their guts bloated, and they had to be taken to the hospital. She would get drunk and throw dishes at him, resulting in horrible screaming matches. She'd sleep until noon, then go out bar hopping, flirting with other men.
And then in September of 1956, Hilda vanished. The neighbors informing Joseph she'd left with another man.
Joseph placed the children with a family that boarded children in the suburbs, only seeing them on the weekends. His dream of giving his children a different life than his, a happy life with wholesome and caring parents, was over.
Joseph then heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Hilda and her new boyfriend, Hans Albert, were living in Hans's car, and Joseph found the vehicle parked by a graveyard, surrounded by trash, beer bottles, paper plates, plastic utensils. Hilda was sleeping in the back seat, alone, and Joe pleaded with her to return, saying the children missed her. He promised to never fight with her, and she told him,
"I'm never coming back to you. I don't love you. You scare me because you're crazy. Now go away."
But to Joe, he felt she'd abandoned him because he wasn't as sexually powerful as her new lover, whose bird must have been much larger and stronger than his.
Joe then moved back in with his parents, into his childhood bedroom with the hole carved in the wall.
Joe tried to work with the Catholic Church to get his marriage to Hilda annulled, but he wasn't able to. And I have to say here, when Catholic folks annul their marriage instead of getting divorced, doesn't that make their children bastards now who go to hell or purgatory? I don't know. I have no idea. But in the end, he got a divorce, which was official on January 3rd, 1958. And then, because of the divorce, the Vatican excommunicated him.
When Joe would take the train to the boarding school to collect his children for the weekend, he often ran into a young woman named Betty. Betty loved little Stevie and Anna and would play with them, and she and Joe started talking, then writing letters and calling each other on the phone, and soon they were dating.
At first, Joe told Betty that the children's mother was dead, but later admitted they'd gotten divorced. Like Hilda, Betty was small-breasted, and the truth was, he couldn't have even begun a relationship with her or even talked to her if she had large breasts, as he was still terrified of them and still suffered nightmares of being suffocated by them.
Unlike Hilda, who was sexually active and had no problem sleeping with him, Betty refused to have sex until she was married. She was a good girl, unlike the Irish Hilda. So Joe asked her to marry him, and she accepted.
On April 20th, 1958, they were wed, again by a justice of peace in Maryland, as Joe couldn't be married in a Catholic church since he was a divorcee.
They rented a house in the Kensington neighborhood on Janney Street, and Joe had the children move in with them. It was his second chance at having a loving, happy family.
Chapter 5. All happy families are, well, not quite alike.
The way she walks, the way she talks, or the way she loves me. Just look at me, I'm like a monkey in a coconut tree. You know I'm overjoyed, 'cause boy, oh boy, she's my gal.
In order to have sex with Betty, Joe would have to have a knife near him. Again, like with Hilda, he didn't want to hurt her, had no desire to cut her, and loved her very much. But he needed the fantasy of cutting women in his head in order to gain an erection.
So he kept a knife hidden on a shelf in the headboard of the bed. And as he caressed Betty, he'd reach up and at the same time stroke the knife.
But the family was more or less a happy one. Though Joe became strict, not letting Betty out, selling her car, because he was paranoid she'd leave him like Hilda had. He'd never learned to drive. In fact, he never would learn, and didn't want Betty having that power over him. He'd once seen Betty smile at a sailor, and it filled him with jealousy and feelings of inadequacy.
Joe had worked his way up a chain of different shoe repair shops, like his father, winning many shoe repair awards along the way, and was now working at the Underground Arcade in Center City and was the highest paid shoe repairman in Philadelphia.
Joe was now 22. He hadn't hallucinated in 7 years, but his undiagnosed schizophrenia was returning, and with it, horrible visions.
A figure in a black cloak and a witch's hat with white half moons and stars on it appeared before Joseph and told him to burn down his house.
As Joe later said,
"Alone in the house, I saw the figure in black. The flames from his mouth were beautiful and really turned me on."
So Joseph set his shed on fire, lighting a can of varnish which went up with a whoosh. The fire moving to the house, gutting it before the fire department arrived and extinguished the flames.
As Joe would later say, "Oh, what ecstasy setting fires brings to my body. What power I feel at the thought of fire, all my treasures and total ruin. Oh, what pleasure, what heavenly pleasure. See the flames, and no longer is fire just a daydream. It is the reality of heaven on earth." The fire at Janney Street was my first fire. I collected $1,900 in insurance money because nobody knew how the fire started. Of course, the money couldn't pay for the anguish I felt after the fire. I was no more Joe Kallinger. I am an arsonist. I must admit, I love fire. But I did this because I was ordered to do it by a force, maybe the devil, outside myself.
Joseph, Betty, and the kids then moved into a house his parents had bought as an investment, and Joe took over the mortgage.
They had a garden, and the family was very happy. The children playing, and soon Betty was pregnant. giving birth to a baby girl they named Mary Jo.
But Joseph's mental illness was always burbling beneath the surface. He began to suffer from horrible, debilitating headaches, and on July 25th, 1959, he somehow wandered out 70 miles to Hazleton, Pennsylvania, with no idea of who he was or where he was going.
He was found wandering the streets and hospitalized with severe amnesia, no name to give for the record.
But after a few days in his sleep, a nurse heard him mumble a phone number, and she called it, reaching Joseph's father.
And after 9 days, Joseph was returned home, receiving a diagnosis of hysterical neurosis.
Back at home, Joe became obsessed with bowling. He'd bowl during his lunch hour, before and after work, compulsively.
And then he built a 12-foot-long, 4-foot-wide bowling alley right in his bedroom against the far wall.
Betty was fine with it, as she saw it helped calm him and alleviate his headaches. But the neighbors, and it's a row house here, they're directly on the other side of the wall, hated the racket, the sound of pins banging as the heavy ball smashed into them, often in the middle of the night. Yeah, I would hate that.
Oh, Jesus Christ, can you imagine? I'd lose my mind. But the bowling seems to have worked at calming Joseph, giving his mind something to focus on, and his neurosis appears to have abated. And Betty and Joe had a string of children. Joseph Jr. in 1960, Michael Noel, born Christmas Day 1961, and James John in 1963.
Jesus. But he was still obsessed with discarded objects, going through the neighborhood trash cans, looking for treasures, filling the basement with broken televisions, speakers, record players, washing machines, electric motors, vacuum hoses, picture frames, car parts. All of that just made me shudder. He even bought a broken X-ray machine from a dentist, thinking it would help him with his orthopedic studies.
Joe began to think of himself as a master repairman and a wizard. And as he says, well, junk gave me a feeling of closeness of attachment that I couldn't get with people.
Soon the house was filled to the brim with junk, and Joe was acting stranger and stranger. He'd always been obsessed with holes, and in the middle of the kitchen, he began digging a hole, saying it was an air raid shelter, and he tore out the entire kitchen wall that attached to the foundation, digging and digging this giant hole he then filled with junk he called his treasures.
And the figure in black was back, demanding Joe burn the house down. 4 times he would set the house alight, going deeply in debt, hiring workers to fix the fire damage. Finally, in October of 1967, he was arrested for arson, but the charges were dropped when it was revealed he had no fire insurance and there was no financial motive. Investigators just couldn't understand why someone would set their house on fire for no reason at all.
The repairs for the fire damage kept adding up, eventually reaching over $15,000. And when he couldn't pay it, the repairman took him to court and won an injunction. Now anything he owned could be foreclosed on, crushing his dream of opening a chain of repair shops.
Chapter 5. Home Again, Home Again.
In February 1967, Joe and his family, deep in debt, ostracized by the neighbors who called him bananas and crazy for bowling all night and setting his house on fire, moved into his childhood home, and all the ghosts returned.
It should have been a happy time, as this was the inheritance he'd been promised since he was a child. His father had retired, and Joe inherited the house, which included his shoe repair shop. He had it all now.
Instead, his delusions returned, and here in the old family home, Joe became obsessed with the orthopedic work that God had commanded him to use to save humanity all those years ago.
He was getting stranger and stranger, now including the children in his weird delusions.
He'd wake the children up in the middle of the night and demand they roam the alleys searching for treasures in the trash, bringing a little wagon along to fill.
He began betting on horses, becoming obsessed with a horse track, using his children as mediums to pick winning horses, making his kids wear his special orthopedic shoes so that their spines were aligned in a psychic way, which would allow them to psychically become one with the horses and prophesize which was to win.
And the children began to rebel, skipping school, getting into fights, causing trouble in the neighborhood.
In 1969, the devil returned full force, demanding Joe perform sadistic acts, which he resisted. He was hearing voices, having hallucinations. He became positive that the neighbors were CIA spies surveilling him, so he covered up all the windows, put bars on them. To ease his paranoia, he began huffing the glues and dyes used in his shoe repair.
He bought a separate house under the pretense of using it as a warehouse for his business and began hiding out there, performing strange incantations and magical spells. He ripped up the floorboards in the basement and ordered his children to dig a 20-foot deep hole, digging and digging until they reached water level.
Joe would go into this pit and there in the darkness begin to chant, Kyria, Kyra Ostoa, Kyra, Kyastan, Alamari, Kyram, Kyrishol, Cream. Chants of the devil. And deep in the earthen pit, he performed bizarre rituals, masturbating in the hole, defecating in the hole, his excretions part of a magical elixir, freeing his body of heavy substances and becoming lighter and lighter until he became weightless and was filled with uncanny strength.
He experimented endlessly with orthopedic shoes, conducting 40,000 experiments with himself, his children, his wife, even convincing the mailman to wear his magic shoes that Joseph claimed could save the world.
Then, like a true scientist, he bought some hamsters with the idea of making little shoes for them, convinced feet controlled the brain, and he could prove it with the tiny rodents, like scientists performing experiments on lab rats.
He named the 4 hamsters Winko, Popsicle, Jelly Roll, and Humpty Dumpty, giving each a name tag. But then, to his utter dismay, he realized he couldn't make the hamsters shoes. Their feet were just too small.
He talked to the hamsters, trying to reason with them, telling them it was vital to the future of mankind that they listen and obey his commands, telling the hamsters that he'd make them little hats and little suits. They just did as he asked.
But though he was sure they understood him, he couldn't get them to do what he commanded. As he would later say,
Well, first, I found I couldn't make shoes and wedges for their feet. Then I couldn't get them interested in my experiment. They didn't even perk up their ears when I told them about the hats and suits. But I knew they understood me all right. They played foxy to throw me off my guard. They didn't listen, didn't seem to want to get it. While I talked, they ignored me. One would hop on the wheel and make it turn, or they'd nibble food. One smartass kept eyeballing me with his little brown eyes. Then he lay down in a corner and skulked. Finally, I stopped talking and started the experiment. They'd listen to me now, or they wouldn't survive. I got a pencil with an eraser on it and used the eraser end to force one of them. It was Winko, to get on the wheel and start trotting. I wanted to see how long he could keep that wheel going before he collapsed and died.
Disturbingly, taking off work, Joe sat at the hamster cage for 2 days straight, forcing the hamster to run in the wheel before it collapsed and died.
Then Joe repeated the experiment on each of the hamsters, forcing them to run on the wheel until they died and burying them in the backyard. Later saying, I had been a parent to all 4 of them. They disappointed me. I got down on my knees and prayed for their souls.
He dreamed of building a huge hamster wheel, big enough for humans, and as he says,
Then I would have gotten human beings, convicts from prison and crazy people from the funny farm, and run all of them through the experiment. I'd have had shoes and wedges, and I would have found out how to keep people alive forever. If we all had the correct adjustment of shoes to feet, there'd be no more wars. We'd know how to get along with each other, how to solve problems. There'd be no more hate, only love.
The children were moving from rebellious teens to straight juvenile delinquents, especially Stevie, Joey, and Michael, who stole a woman's purse, broke into houses, and stripped cars for spare parts.
And very disturbingly, Joey had even fallen into sex work. He was giving other boys oral sex, and Mary Jo, acting as his pimp, would collect 50 cents from each of them. And this is just some really fucked up 70s youth gone completely feral shit.
And Joseph would seemingly encourage some of their antisocial behavior, taking Michael out in the middle of the night with cans of spray paint and writing graffiti on the school walls. Absolute insanity.
But it all changed on New Year's Eve 1972, when Joseph was visited by a large figure bathed in white light, who told him,
Joseph, I control you now.
It was the supreme being, the maximum leader of the universe. And it demanded that children be punished for their transgressions.
So in order to control his rebellious and wayward children, Joseph resorted to corporal punishment, taking it to the absolute extreme and building a torture chamber in the basement with ropes, rubber hoses, straight pins, straps of leather, and a homemade cat o' nine tails.
He bolted sheets of steel over the basement windows, packing them with concrete, making the basement absolutely escape-proof and a place that no one could see into.
At midnight, Joe would hallucinate a giant grandfather clock chiming. Then go wake up one of the children and take them down to the basement for their punishments, throwing pins at them and whipping them.
But the brutal and sadistic punishments only fueled the children on, and now they avoided home as much as possible. So, in order to metaphorically show them their place, he took his children out to the rose garden, which was in full bloom, and told them the flowers were his enemies and had to be destroyed, making them smash the flowers under their feet and rip the plants out by their roots.
It was all too much for Mary Jo and Joe Jr., who decided to run away.
And when Mary Jo and Joe Jr. ran away, Joseph roamed the streets in a taxi cab until he found them, demanding they return home with him.
Joseph then brought Mary Jo and Joe Jr. down into the torture chamber, handcuffing Joey to a refrigerator and beating him with a hammer handle.
He then took Mary Jo not quite 13, and at knife point, forced her to strip down to her bra and panties, then hog-tied her wrists to her ankles.
Taking a metal spatula, Joseph heated it on the stove until it was glowing red, then pressed it to Mary Jo's inner thigh.
As she howled in pain, Joseph began to chant, "You will never run away from me again, never run away from me again, never run away from me again, never run away from me again."
He wanted to do more to her, but stopped himself. As he said,
"We have to burn to create, burn to purify." I hoped that when Mary Jo felt the pain from the spatula, all the pure cells in her body would rush to come back. I hoped that they would transplant into her body the original goodness that I believed others had driven out. I was going to put the hot spatula into her vagina and shove it right on up into her guts, sizzle the badness out of her so that the goodness could come back. God gave me that instruction, but I just couldn't do it.
"Gee, thanks, buddy." When he released Mary Jo and Joey, they went to the police, and Joseph was arrested.
In jail, he attempted to set himself on fire. He was facing a 40-year sentence for child abuse. Now, I wonder if all this obsession with fire began when his father burned his fingertips as punishment for stealing.
In jail, Joseph was sent to psychiatric screening and diagnosed as a schizophrenic. And at one point, it was suggested he be institutionalized. But that never happened, unfortunately.
After a long, complicated series of hearings where several judges were involved, Joseph eventually received a suspended sentence and was put on 4 years psychiatric probation, required to report to the community health center, where, after a 5-minute interview, Joseph was told there was nothing wrong with him and the psychiatric counseling ended. Just what the fuck?
He'd somehow slipped through the cracks of the system and returned home into the Kallinger Rapid Shoe Repair.
Now that he was seen as a criminal and degenerate in the community, business was slow. So slow he had to go on welfare. So he pleaded with Mary Jo and Joey to go to the court and tell them that the child abuse charges were not true.
He tried to bribe them, promised them that once business picked back up, he'd buy them whatever they wanted. Food, clothes, money for movies, restaurants, vacations. Saying it was the only way the family business could recover and they'd be poor unless they did so.
So Mary Jo and Joey agreed. They wanted steak dinners again. And these kids are just wild. They thought it would be fun to stick it to the man and lie to the judge.
So they created a fake diary, which they backdated and wrote in it that they had a plan to frame their father for abuse, thinking they could be wild and free with him in jail and then sell off all his tools.
So on May 2nd, 1973, Joe hired a lawyer and filed a motion for a new trial.
Chapter 6, Like Father, Like Son.
But Joey was a full-on juvenile delinquent at this point. He got into a fight with a police officer, kicking him in the balls, was arrested, and it was not his first charge. At this point, Joey had been arrested for larceny, vandalism, trespassing, even littering after a cop told him to stop throwing trash in the street, and he told the cop to fuck off.
Joey was committed to Philadelphia's Youth Study Center. He ran away, was arrested again, and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia like his father, and was committed to Eastern State Hospital. He was 14 years old.
Eventually, after testifying in court that he'd made up the child abuse allegations against his father, Joey returned home in May of 1974.
But despite succeeding in having Mary Jo and Joey recant their child abuse allegations, Joseph Kallinger felt like a failure.
At this point, Joseph, by his own records, had conducted over 40,000 orthopedic experiments to save humanity, and each and every one of them had failed. All of them. His hamster experiment had been a failure. He hadn't even managed to heal himself.
And then God descended from the heavens and appeared before Joseph, draped in mist and flowing white gowns, saying, "Yes, yes, you are a failure, Joseph Kallinger, but you can make up for failures with a new task. You must destroy all of mankind. I hereby command you to take a butcher knife and kill every man, woman, child, and infant on the face of the earth."
As Joseph would later say, "My thoughts were drenched in blood, blood gushing out of human bodies, blood flooding the cities, staining rivers and oceans, blood boiling in a huge pot with morsels of sexual organs in it that quiver while bubbles pop and splash."
And so Joseph Kallinger prepared himself to destroy all of humanity and murder every person on the face of the earth.
But to hear about that, you're going to have to tune in next week because we are out of time today.
Thank you so much for listening, and see you next week.
And you have a story you want us to cover, let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week for part 2, the final installment of Joseph Kallinger the Shoemaker.
See you then.